He was just a struggling single dad boarding a plane with the weight of the world on his shoulders. She was already seated when he arrived, a quiet woman in seat 27B with eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. He thought it was just a wrong seat, a mistake. But that day at 30,000 feet, something unexpected began. Sometimes it's not where you're going that changes your life. It's who you're sitting next to. Before we begin this heartwarming journey of resilience, kindness, and quiet hope, if you enjoy stories that touch the soul and remind us of the beauty in second chances, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more moments like this, where ordinary lives take extraordinary turns. Now lean in. The story's about to begin. A struggling single dad took the wrong seat. The woman beside him said, "I saved that spot for you." Jake Morris had been through worse. At least that's what he kept telling himself as he half-jogged through the crowded terminal of Denver International Airport, his backpack thudding against his shoulder with every step. He hadn't flown in nearly a decade, couldn't afford to, and now that he was doing it, he was running late, holding a crumpled boarding pass in one hand and a cold cup of gas station coffee in the other. Gate B24. Gate B, damn it, he muttered under his breath as he realized he'd passed it. He turned around, weaving through a sea of wheelie bags and winter coats, dodging elbows and coffee spills. The flight to Seattle was already boarding, and if he missed it, there wouldn't be another shot. Not at the job, not at a future. He reached the gate just as the final boarding call echoed through the speakers. The attendant gave him a tight-lipped smile, scanned his pass, and waved him through. "Last one." "You made it," she said, and Jake exhaled a shaky breath, nodding as if he had any control left over the morning. Inside the cabin, he scanned the rows. 28, 27. His seat was 27A window. A small comfort. Maybe he could rest for a bit before figuring out how to convince a high-end auto shop in Seattle to hire a small-town mechanic with more oil stains than credentials. He reached row 27 and saw that the aisle seat was already taken. A woman mid-30s, maybe with dark auburn hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and a book balanced on her knee. She looked up just as Jake motioned toward the window seat. "I think that's me, 27A, he said, lifting his ticket slightly. She tilted her head, smiled softly, and said something that made him stop in his tracks. "I saved that spot for you." He blinked. "Sorry." She closed her book with a quiet snap and gestured toward the empty seat. "Go ahead. Sit. I meant, it's yours." Jake hesitated, not sure if she was joking or being kind. There was something easy in her voice, not flirtation, not formality, just warmth, like someone who recognized another lost traveler. "Thanks," he muttered, sliding past her, awkwardly knocking her elbow slightly with his backpack. "Sorry," he added quickly. "No worries," she replied, her tone light. As he settled in, stuffing his backpack under the seat and fumbling with the seatbelt, he caught a whiff of her perfume. Subtle, clean, something like citrus and paper. She turned back to her book, and he took the opportunity to glance her way again. She was striking not in an obvious magazine cover way, but in the way someone looks when they're completely unaware of their own effect on the world. They took off without much small talk. Jake watched the earth shrink beneath them through the scratched window, trying to shake the feeling that everything in his life was unspooling too fast. His fingers drummed restlessly on the tray table. He'd left his son Sam with his sister back home in Colorado Springs. It wasn't the first time, but it never got easier. The kid had cried this time, not out of fear, but out of knowing his dad was hanging on by a thread. Jake exhaled and leaned back. "You okay?" the woman beside him asked, turning slightly in her seat. Jake gave a tired half-smile. "Just running on empty, I guess." She studied him for a moment, then said, "It's been a long morning, long year." She laughed softly. "Well, you made the flight. That's something." Jake nodded. "Jake, by the way, Isabel," she replied. "Nice to meet you, Jake." There was a pause, not awkward, just space enough for both of them to breathe in it. "What takes you to Seattle?" she asked. "Job interview, mechanic, or hoping to be. Things went south with my old shop. Economy, small-town bills piling up, you name it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, that was probably too much info." Isabel shook her head. "Not at all. It's honest. We could use more of that." He chuckled, surprised at how easily the tension was easing off his shoulders. "What about you heading home?" "Sort of. I live there, but I've been traveling, taking time off work. What do you do? He asked, sipping his cold coffee. She hesitated just a breath too long. Consulting, engineering sector. Auto, he asked instinctively. Her eyes flicked to his with curiosity. Used to be. There was a beat of quiet between them again this time, layered with something unsaid. Jake leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. You know, he murmured, most people don't talk on planes anymore. Everyone's got headphones and walls up. Isabel smiled, folding the corner of her page. Maybe some walls are worth lowering. He opened his eyes and turned to her. Why'd you say that earlier, about saving the seat? She looked out the window briefly before answering. Because sometimes you just know when someone needs to feel like they belong. Jake didn't respond right away. His throat felt tighter than he expected. The seatbelt sign dinged on as turbulence rocked the plane gently. Isabel gripped the armrest just slightly. Jake instinctively steadied her elbow. You okay? He asked. She nodded, then looked at his hand. You're steady. He smiled faintly. Used to be afraid of flying. Now, not much scares me anymore. Isabel's eyes softened. What changed? Jake looked down. I lost my wife. 2 years ago. Cancer. After that, fear just felt like a waste of time. The moment hung between them. The hum of the engines. The weight of quiet truth. I'm sorry, she said, her voice low. Thanks. They didn't speak for a while after that, but it wasn't silence. It was something closer to shared understanding. As the plane began its descent, Isabel tucked her book into her bag and glanced at him once more. Jake, I hope that interview works out. He smiled. Me too. She hesitated, then added, if it doesn't, don't let that be the end of your story. Jake looked at her. Really looked. Funny, he said, you don't seem like a consultant. You seem like someone who changes things. Isabel's lips curved unreadable. Maybe I'm both. As the wheels touched down, Jake had no idea that the woman beside him was more than just a stranger with a kind smile, or that his whole life had just changed because he'd sat in the wrong seat, or maybe the exact right one. Jake woke the next morning in a borrowed bed at a cheap motel just off the I-5 in Seattle. The mattress creaked every time he shifted, and the heating unit under the window rattled like it had seen better decades. Still, it beat the couch he almost slept on at the Greyhound station. He sat up slowly, joints stiff from travel and tension, and rubbed his face with both hands. The morning light leaking through the faded curtains cast long bars across the dingy carpet, and for a second he let himself believe it might be the beginning of something. The night before felt like a half-remembered dream, the flight, the turbulence, and especially Isabel. The woman in 27B, the warmth in her voice, the way she listened, really listened, like his words were worth something. Jake couldn't remember the last time anyone looked at him like that. He took a long sip of burnt motel coffee and opened his battered notebook. The interview was at 10 a.m., but Jake had a habit of preparing for things that might not come. He flipped to the sketches he'd done weeks ago, a mobile engine diagnostic cart powered by solar and battery backup. Something he dreamed of building if anyone ever gave him the chance. The interview wasn't for inventors. It was for a mechanic's position at a prestigious garage that specialized in luxury hybrids and electric cars. Still, a man could hope. By 9:20, Jake had washed up, pressed the least wrinkled of his shirts, and walked the 6 blocks to the shop, a sleek, glass-wrapped facility nestled between a yoga studio and a Tesla dealership. It looked like the kind of place that would rather spit-shine chrome than get grease under their nails. Jake took a breath and stepped inside. Appointment with Miss Ramirez, he told the receptionist, trying not to sound nervous. He was directed to a waiting area where the walls were lined with framed magazine features and awards. Green Garage of the Year, Seattle's most innovative auto facility. He felt like a man with mud on his boots at a wedding. After 10 minutes, a tall woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bun, stepped out and introduced herself. Mr. Morris, I'm Claudia Ramirez. Follow me. They walked past polished workstations, diagnostic pods with touchscreens, and one car lifted on a robotic hoist that looked more like something from NASA than a repair shop. Jake kept his mouth shut and his awe tucked deep in his pocket. In the interview room, Claudia scanned his resume with a blank expression. I see you worked for 15 years at Baxter's Auto in Colorado Springs. Yes, ma'am. And you're trained in combustion engines, transmission systems, and carburetors. She raised an eyebrow. Jake offered a small smile. Old school stuff. I know EVs are different, but I've been self-studying hybrid systems for a couple of years now. Claudia nodded slowly. We don't typically hire mechanics without formal EV certification. I understand, Jake replied, his voice calm but firm. But I can learn fast and I don't make the same mistake twice. I've rebuilt engines other people gave up on. She folded her hands. We've already shortlisted a few candidates. Jake felt his chance slipping. Can I show you something? Claudia hesitated, then gestured toward the table. Jake reached into his folder and unfolded a rough sketch, the mobile diagnostics cart. This isn't perfect, he admitted, but it's a concept I've been working on. It's designed to help remote shops scan hybrid systems without needing a full facility. Something small towns could use. Claudia studied it. Her expression didn't change much, but she didn't push it away either. After a long pause, she stood. Wait here. Jake exhaled and tried not to count the seconds. The idea of going back home without a job was heavier than the thick Seattle clouds outside. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The door finally opened, but it wasn't Claudia who walked in. It was Isabel. Jake stood up instinctively, caught completely off guard. She looked different now, more composed, more formal. Wearing a tailored navy blazer, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Yet the same calm spark danced in her eyes. Jake, she said, offering a small smile. You made it. He blinked, still processing. You work here. She walked to the table, picked up his sketch. This idea. It's smart, resourceful, practical. You're thinking about people, not just engines. Jake shifted. I didn't realize you were senior technical advisor, she finished gently. I consult on innovation and community-based outreach projects. I've been away for a while, but I came back last month. Jake frowned. Was all that on the plane? Was it part of this? No, Isabel said firmly. That was just two strangers sitting beside each other. But I believed in what you said then, and I believe in it now. Jake lowered his eyes, not sure whether to feel grateful or embarrassed. I told Claudia to keep your file. She wasn't convinced, but after hearing your pitch, Isabel paused, then smiled. We want to offer you a trial position. You'll work under our senior tech shadow for 3 weeks. Show us what you got. Jake's breath hitched. Yeah? Yes. I'll give it everything. I know you will, she said softly. There was a moment, brief but full, where they simply stood, the noise of the city outside, muffled by the glass in distance. Jake broke the silence. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take the seat, Isabel replied with a glint of humor. We've saved it for someone like you. Jake laughed, still a little stunned. Seat 27B, huh? She smiled. Something like that. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. You should call your son. I think he'd want to hear the good news. Jake nodded, heart pounding. For the first time in a long while, the road ahead looked more open than closed. And the woman who'd once seemed like a passing kindness, she'd just opened the next chapter of his life. The second week of Jake's trial at the garage felt like stepping into a new world and trying not to trip over the furniture. Everything was cleaner, quieter, and smarter than any shop he'd worked in before. Diagnostic tools didn't whir or click or smell of grease, they whispered. Cars didn't rumble in with dying mufflers. They glided in silence like cats. Even the uniforms were sleek, embroidered with the company's name in silver thread. Jake wore his like borrowed armor. He was trying, and hard. Showing up early, staying late, watching the senior techs with quiet intensity. Some of the younger staff gave him sideways glances like he was a charity case, or someone's cousin who got a lucky break. But he let it slide off. He wasn't there to impress them. He was there because Isabel had believed in him. And because his son Sam had said on the phone, I knew you could do it, Dad. Jake would have climbed mountains after that. On a drizzly Tuesday afternoon, he was assigned to assist on a hybrid battery diagnostic, a task he hadn't done in years, and never with the high-tech scanner now in his hands. His palms were damp as he keyed in the sequences, watching numbers scroll like ticker tape across the screen. Something didn't feel right. Voltage readouts were inconsistent. He glanced at Logan, the lead technician, a man 10 years younger and 3 degrees smarter. Hey, these readings look off. Could be the relay, maybe shorted. Logan barely looked up. Stick to the script. Just run the scan and log it. Jake hesitated. But if I don't, Jake, Logan said, voice clipped, you're on a trial. Observe. Don't troubleshoot unless asked. It stung more than Jake wanted to admit, but he stepped back, jaw clenched. Later that evening, Isabel found him in the back room, hunched over a battered old battery core he'd salvaged from the scrap pile. Tools spread around him like puzzle pieces, sleeves rolled up grease, smudging the side of his face. You're not on the clock, she said gently. I know. He didn't look up, just trying to understand the system better. Isabel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him with a quiet smile. You've been doing good work. Jake shrugged. I'm not fast with the tech. They all know it. They also didn't rebuild a '62 Mustang engine using hand machine parts. He smiled slightly. That's different. Not really, she said. One's muscle, one's current. Same heart. Jake looked up at her, surprised. You talk like a mechanic, Isabel chuckled. My brother taught me. When I was 15, we rebuilt an old Pontiac together in our backyard. He was patient, made me believe I could fix anything. Jake sensed something shift in her voice, a weight maybe, or a memory. What happened to him? Isabel hesitated, then said softly, he passed away. Car accident. Years ago. She drew a slow breath. That's why I left the industry for a while. Everything reminded me of him. The smells, the tools, even the sound of a torque wrench. Jake's heart ached with a strange familiarity. Loss wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was mechanical. Sometimes it hummed like regret. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Isabel nodded, pushing off the wall. Grief doesn't ask for permission. It just moves in and rearranges the furniture. They were silent a moment, two people in a brightly lit back room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, and something unspoken building between them. You were right, though, Jake finally said. About the seat. She raised an eyebrow. Seat 27B. I think you were the first person to look at me and not see a problem that needed fixing. Isabel's face softened. Maybe because I saw someone who's always fixing things for everyone else. Their eyes met, and for a second time did something strange. It paused, tilted, then moved again. Just then Logan burst into the room. Jake, your scan earlier. You were right. Relay's toast. Could have caused a short, I told Ramirez. Jake blinked. You sure? Logan nodded, sheepish. Yeah. Good call. After he left, Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Isabel gave him a look. That feeling, that's what trust tastes like. Jake laughed, and the sound was real, like something unclenched inside him. They left together a little after 7, the rain having turned to mist. Outside, the air smelled like wet asphalt and pine. Do you have a ride? She asked, tugging her coat tighter. Bus stop 2 blocks that way, Jake said, pointing. Isabel hesitated. Can I give you a lift? Jake looked at her, a dozen polite rejections ready, but then he saw it again, that look that wasn't pity or obligation. Sure, he said. That'd be nice. They walked in silence for a while, their steps in sync on the sidewalk. When she unlocked her car, a quiet silver plug-in coupe, Jake whistled low. Figured you for something fancier. Isabel grinned. You'd be surprised how many things I'm not. As the engine hummed to life, Jake stared out the window, watching the city blur past. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know if he could trust a good thing after so much loss. But for the first time in years, he wasn't running on fumes. Maybe he was finally moving forward. The invitation came on a Friday, tucked into Jake's locker like a note passed in high school. Community Outreach Roundtable, internal staff session, 6:00 p.m., location Conference Room B. Note, food provided. Yes, really. Jake read it twice before realizing the food provided line was in Isabel's handwriting, small, neat, slightly curved at the ends. Just like her voice when she was trying to be disarming. He almost tossed it. Community meetings weren't his thing. He'd always preferred torque specs to small talk. But curiosity and maybe something quieter, something growing in the space between him and Isabel, nudged him toward showing up. That, and he hadn't eaten a proper dinner in 2 days. The conference room was bigger than expected. All glass walls and recycled wood furnished like a tech startup's break room. There were maybe a dozen people, technicians, a few office staff, and Isabel at the front with a laptop open and sleeves rolled to her elbows. Jake slipped into the back row unnoticed at first until Isabel caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. Not a thank you, not a command, just a welcome. He settled in a little out of place in his oil-marked jeans and flannel shirt, while others clicked pens and sipped kombucha. Isabel began. We've been expanding our outreach model. It started with EV literacy workshops, but there's interest now in mobile service options for underserved communities, especially rural areas. Jake straightened. That sounded familiar. Isabel clicked to the next slide, a photo of a mobile diagnostic cart. Sleeker than his original sketch, but unmistakably based on it. A murmur ran through the room. She gestured toward the screen. This concept was brought to us by one of our own, someone who sees possibility where others see limitation. Jake Morris. Every head turned. Jake felt heat climb his neck, his chest tightening. Not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. Gratitude laced with disbelief. He cleared his throat. It's just an idea. Something I sketched back in Colorado when my town lost its only shop. Isabel smiled. Sometimes ideas change things. After the meeting, people came to him, some with questions, others with encouragement. Even Logan surprisingly said, "Didn't peg you as a guy with blueprints." Jake just smiled. Later, as the room cleared, he approached Isabel near the snack table, where she was tucking leftover sandwiches into a recyclable container. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice low. "I wanted to," she replied. "You planted the seed. I just gave it a little light." Jake looked at her, at the soft lines of her face, in the glow of the room's pendant lighting. "You know, for someone who hides behind titles, you're not very subtle." She laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not very easy to ignore." That silenced him for a beat. "I keep thinking about that flight," he said finally. "About what you said about saving the seat." Isabel tilted her head. "You thought I was just being polite." "I think," he said slowly, "you were the first person in a long time who didn't look at me and see failure." "I saw a man who still believed in trying," she said. "And that's rare." He glanced away. "I still don't get why you didn't tell me who you were." Isabel leaned against the table. "Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I just wanted to hear you talk. Not pitch. Just be." Jake met her eyes again, steadier this time. "I think I like the version of me you see." "You should," she said softly. There was a long pause. He reached for a sandwich triangle, unwrapped it, then said, "So, what happens to the cart idea?" "We develop it," she replied. "Prototype testing. If it works, we deploy a pilot in 3 counties. You'd lead the team." Jake blinked. "Me?" "You have the vision," Isabel said. "You know how to connect with people who aren't engineers, who don't speak in schematics." Jake was quiet, absorbing it. Then he grinned. "Can I still wear my flannel?" Isabel smirked. "I think that's required." They left the building together, the night air crisp with the scent of pine and distant rain. The city hummed softly around them, not cold, not rushing, just present. As they walked to her car, Isabel glanced at him. "So, Jake, if I were to book a flight somewhere random and save a seat again, would you sit next to me?" Jake chuckled. "Only if it's 27A this time. I like the window." She smiled, unlocking her car. "Deal." He opened the passenger door, then paused before getting in. "Why 27B?" She looked up at him, her eyes more serious now. "Because that's where I met the man who reminded me it's okay to believe in something again." Jake held her gaze. In the quiet night where engines didn't rumble and the city lights felt far away, Jake realized something. 27B wasn't just a seat. It was a turning point. And Isabel. She wasn't just the woman beside him. She was the reason he'd started to believe there was still more story left to write. The following Monday dawned overcast and heavy, a typical Seattle morning, with a sky the color of wet concrete. Jake stood outside the main garage building, clutching a steaming travel mug, and reviewing the mental checklist he'd made the night before. He wasn't sure what he was walking into. Claudia Ramirez had asked him to report to Building D at 8:00 a.m. Sharp, no explanation, given just a firm directive in her usual no-frills tone. Building D wasn't part of the main garage complex. It was tucked farther back on the property, past a row of electric trucks and the company's research annex. Jake had never been there, and neither had most of the other techs. As he approached the nondescript metal door, He could feel his pulse tapping at his throat. Was this where they quietly ended his trial period? A private handshake, a polite dismissal? Maybe the card idea had fizzled already, and Isabel's support couldn't change protocol. He reached for the handle. The door creaked open before he could knock. "Mr. Morris," said Claudia, crisply, holding a clipboard and stepping aside. "Come in." The inside of Building D was unexpected. Not a boardroom, not a lab. It was a garage, but stripped bare. No polished floors, no potted ferns. Just concrete tool cabinets, 2 utility carts, and a single vehicle parked on a lift. A hybrid prototype, its body sleek and unfinished paint matte black parts, exposed like muscle and bone. Jake whistled under his breath. Claudia's mouth twitched. "Glad it impresses. It's the GX9, one of only 3 in the US. The others are locked up in corporate R&D. Jake's eyes widened. "You want me to—" "You'll be assisting Isabel on the engine calibration." Claudia paused. "If she thinks you're ready—" Before he could respond, another door opened, and Isabel walked in wearing a slate gray coverall tablet and hand hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. For a moment, Jake forgot how to breathe. She smiled faintly. "Morning, 27A. Jake blinked. "You're running the project I designed the battery-to-drive calibration system 3 years ago." She shrugged. "Kind of a reunion." Claudia handed Jake a packet. "Sign these. NDA liability standard protocols. After that, it's all you two." And just like that, Claudia left, heels clicking across concrete like punctuation marks. Jake glanced at the car again, then at Isabel. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Isabel walked over to the prototype, resting a hand on its curved hood. "Because the person who designed this never thought it would reach the communities that needed it most. And the guy standing in front of me, he's already thinking about how to get it there." Jake exhaled slowly. "You could have picked anyone. I didn't want anyone." She looked up at him. "I wanted you." He stared at her, speechless. Then she handed him a wrench. They worked in tandem for hours. Isabel guided him through the powertrain system while Jake adjusted settings, his fingers learning new controls with every twist. She didn't hover, didn't condescend. She taught the way real teachers did, by trusting you to rise to the challenge. By noon, his back ached and his shirt clung to his skin, but he didn't care. The engine pulsed under their hands, and every time something clicked into place, Jake felt it in his chest. "You're good at this," Isabel said during a water break, handing him a bottle. "Not just with tools, reading the rhythm of the system." "You listen," Jake chuckled. "Maybe I've spent too long around things that can't talk back." She laughed. "Machines talk. You just have to know the language." He sipped his water, watching her from the corner of his eye. She moved like someone who belonged not just in the space but in her skin, confident, calm. But now that he'd seen behind the curtain, he also noticed the flickers of vulnerability, the pause before she entered a room, the way her eyes scanned everything, as if always bracing for impact. Jake set his bottle down. "You said earlier this was a reunion. With the system you designed." Isabel nodded. "I walked away from it 2 years ago. After my brother died, we were building a new kind of accessibility plan together. Mobile EV hubs, diagnostic platforms, everything you've been talking about. But after the accident, I couldn't touch it." Jake's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "For a while I convinced myself that stepping back was honoring him. But the truth, I was scared to fail without him." Jake swallowed. And now she looked at him. "Now I think he'd want me to keep building with people who still believe in the work." Jake leaned against the workbench. "You're not the only one who walked away from something." Isabel tilted her head. "When my wife got sick," he said, voice low, "I stopped dreaming. Fixing cars was the only thing I could still control. But the rest, I gave up on it, even when Sam needed me to dream for both of us." Isabel moved closer, not touching him, but standing close enough that he felt her warmth. "You're dreaming again, Jake. I see it." Their eyes met the space between them, narrowing not physically but emotionally, like two people walking across parallel bridges and realizing they'd always been heading toward the same place. Suddenly, the prototype beeped, interrupting the silence. Jake looked down at the tablet. "Calibration complete," he read aloud, almost stunned. Isabel grinned. "Then I'd say the test was a success." He handed her the wrench with mock solemnity. "We make a good team." She accepted it. I think we've known that since row 27. They stood there framed in the quiet garage, the machine behind them, humming like a heartbeat brought back to life. Jake didn't need a formal offer letter. Not anymore. He already knew he'd found the job that mattered, and maybe something more. The days following the successful calibration felt like a dream. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed some invisible threshold, a place where things weren't so easily dismissed, where his talents, once so confined to the underbelly of mechanics, now felt relevant, seen and valued. He had always prided himself on his ability to fix things, but fixing people, or at least finding a way to connect with them, felt like a whole new challenge. Yet that was exactly what Isabel had done for him. She had looked at him not as a mechanic, but as a partner. She had seen past the grease-streaked hands and the worn-out jeans straight into the parts of him that had been waiting for someone to notice. By Thursday morning, Jake found himself waking earlier than usual, excited to start his day. He didn't often get that kind of feeling. The garage had never been the place he'd imagined thriving, but something about this new path was different. There was purpose in it more than just fixing broken cars or machines. The idea of helping to make a system that could change lives felt right. It felt like he was starting something, not just fixing it. Isabel was already at her workstation when Jake arrived, laptop open, papers scattered deep in thought. He wondered how long she'd been there before he'd walked in. She always seemed to be moving at a pace too fast for anyone else to keep up with, but he admired it. "Morning," he greeted, leaning against the doorway. Isabel looked up, her eyes lightening with a smile. "Morning, 27A. We're almost there. Just a few more calculations, and we can run the final tests." He walked in and dropped his bag beside the bench. "I thought we were done with the testing." We were. But now we need to get the broader impact in play. Once the calibration's complete, we have to figure out how to scale it. It's one thing to design the perfect prototype. It's another thing to turn that into something that can serve the community. We need to make sure it works for everyone, not just the research labs or the privileged. Jake nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. That was the kind of thing he had been thinking about, the idea that even in a world of progress, there was still an element that always got left behind. He had seen that firsthand. Growing up in a small town where the only thing they could count on was a local mechanic, where technology never reached far enough to touch their lives, he understood exactly what Isabel meant. His thoughts were interrupted by the shrill ring of his phone. He glanced at the screen and frowned when he saw the number. It was the local hospital, and immediately his heart rate spiked. He hadn't been expecting a call from them. With a sigh, he answered. "This is Jake," he said, his voice already tight. "Mr. Morris," a woman's voice greeted him. "This is Heather from Mercy Hospital. I'm calling to inform you that we have a potential donor who has requested to speak with you." Jake blinked, stunned. A donor? The last few months had been a blur of hospital visits, unpaid bills, and trying to juggle everything. But a donor? I'm sorry, you have the wrong person." Jake stammered, his mind racing. "I'm just a mechanic." "There's no mistake, Mr. Morris. The donor has specifically asked to help with your son's medical bills. We've been in touch with your wife, but we were unable to get in touch with you earlier. Would you be available to speak with them?" Now Jake's breath caught. "Wait, what, you're serious?" "Yes, please hold while I transfer you." Before Jake could process, the phone clicked, and suddenly there was a voice on the other end, a voice Jake didn't recognize. "Mr. Morris," the voice said, calm and composed. "This is Grace Stevenson. I'm a philanthropist and advocate for children's health care. I've been following your family's story for some time now, and I'd like to help." Jake stood frozen in disbelief. He had heard about donors like this, people with too much money who were seeking to make a difference. But never in a million years had he imagined one would reach out to him. I don't know what to say," Jake finally managed. "Why me? Why my son?" Grace's voice softened. "Because I believe in second chances, and I believe in the strength of a parent who is willing to fight for their child's future. I'm not doing this out of charity, Mr. Morris. I'm doing this because you have shown that kind of strength. I see it in you, in the way you've worked tirelessly, and in the way you haven't given up, no matter how difficult it's been." Jake felt the lump in his throat tighten. His son Sam had been his everything, and yet he had felt helpless, like no matter how hard he worked, he could never quite get ahead enough to give Sam the kind of care he deserved. This was a lifeline. "I can't accept this," Jake murmured, his voice shaky. You don't know me. I know enough. I've done my research. I'm not offering this as a handout, Jake. I'm offering you a partnership. Let me help. The words hung in the air, thick with possibility. Jake had spent so many years fighting just to keep his head above water that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone else help. I don't know what to say, he repeated, the weight of emotion choking him. Say yes, Grace urged softly. Say yes, and let me help you save your son's life. He didn't know how long they talked after that. The words started to blur together, the promise of hope mixing with the overwhelming weight of what that help would mean. When he hung up, he was shaking the phone still in his hand, as if the conversation itself might disappear if he didn't hold on tight enough. Isabel had been watching him quietly from across the room, noticing the tension in his posture, the way he gripped the phone like it was about to slip away. Jake, she asked softly. Jake didn't know what to say at first. He couldn't quite form the words, couldn't make the reality of it settle in. But somehow he managed to lift his gaze and look at Isabel. I, I just got a phone call, he said, his voice unsteady. Someone wants to help. They want to pay for Sam's treatment. All of it. Isabel's eyes widened, her face softening with understanding. Jake, that's incredible. I didn't know what to think. I thought I was going to have to work the rest of my life just to give him a chance. And now this woman just called me out of nowhere. I'm happy for you, Isabel said quietly. You deserve this. You've been fighting for so long. Jake stared at her, at a loss for words. He had spent so many years doing everything himself, trying to keep his family afloat. He never imagined someone would offer him a chance to breathe. But here it was, the help he needed when he'd finally let himself believe it might never come. And suddenly everything was different. Jake hadn't planned on going home early that day. After the call from the donor and the flood of emotions that followed, Isabel had gently nudged him toward the exit. Go see Sam, she'd said. Let him hear it from you. Jake had protested at first. There was still testing to be done, numbers to review, systems to cross-check. But she wouldn't budge. Some things matter more than engine calibration, she'd said with that quiet conviction of hers. And your son is one of them. So now as he turned the key to his sister's front door and heard Sam's laughter echo from the living room, something inside Jake softened, cracked open in a way he hadn't allowed in years. Sam sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by Lego pieces and empty snack wrappers, looking up just as Jake stepped in. Dad Jake knelt, scooped him up, and held him close. Sam was growing fast, but in that moment, he felt small again, safe in his father's arms. Hey, champ, Jake murmured into his son's hair. I've got some big news. Sam pulled back, eyes wide. Did you get the job? Jake chuckled. Yeah, I did. But that's not even the biggest part. He told Sam everything about the donor, about the offer, about the chance for full treatment and support. As he spoke, Sam's little face shifted from confusion to awe to something Jake hadn't seen in a long time: hope, without hesitation. Does this mean... Sam's voice trailed off. No more pills that make me feel sick. No more hospital trips every week. Jake swallowed hard. It means we're going to get help, real help. And yeah, maybe fewer hospital days. Maybe more days just being a kid. Sam grinned, then leaned forward to wrap his arms around Jake's neck again. It's going to be okay, isn't it? Jake closed his eyes, nodding into his son's shoulder. Yeah, buddy, it really is. Later that night, back in his motel room, Jake lay on the too-firm mattress, staring at the ceiling. The happiness of the day had given way to something more complicated. He should have been basking in relief, but instead he felt unsteady, like the ground beneath him was shifting too fast for him to adjust. All his life he'd earned everything the hard way, by grinding, sacrificing, pushing forward without help. So much of his identity had been built around the idea that he had to do it alone. But now people were showing up, offering kindness, offering grace. And for the first time in a long time, Jake wasn't sure how to receive it. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, Isabel stood there, windblown from the cool night air, her coat still damp from a light rain. Hope I'm not intruding, she said, holding up a paper bag. I brought real food, not microwave meals. Jake stepped aside to let her in. You're always welcome. She walked in, setting the bag on the small table by the window. Thought you could use something warm. Thanks, he said quietly, watching her unpack 2 containers of soup and a fresh loaf of bread. For a few minutes, they ate in silence, the kind that didn't feel awkward, but honest, like neither of them wanted to fill the space just for the sake of noise. I'm proud of you, Isabel said eventually, for taking the call, for saying yes. Jake looked at her over his spoon. You make it sound easy. It's not, she admitted. It's one of the hardest things actually letting people in, especially when you've spent years building walls to keep the world out. He nodded slowly. I guess I got so used to holding everything together on my own that the idea of accepting help felt like weakness. It's not, Isabel said. It's courage. Vulnerability is what rebuilds us. Jake studied her then, the flicker in her eyes, the softness beneath the strength. And he realized he wasn't the only one learning to let go of old armor. Isabel, back on the plane when you said you saved that seat for me, did you mean it? She smiled gently. At the time, I didn't know why I said it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just something that felt right. But now, I think it was a beginning, a way of saying, I see you. Jake's voice was quiet. No one said that to me in a long time. Well, she said, reaching across the table, her fingers brushing his. Maybe it's time someone did. He looked down at their hands, hers resting lightly on top of his. Warm, certain, real. I'm scared, he admitted, of messing this up, of needing someone and not knowing how. I'm scared too, she whispered. But I'm here. They sat like that for a long moment, the only sound the soft patter of rain on the window. Jake finally exhaled. You know I don't believe in coincidences. Me neither. You think maybe some people are meant to find each other, even in strange ways. Isabel's eyes met his. I think some seats aren't just saved. They're chosen. Jake leaned forward, closing the space between them just enough that their foreheads touched. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was something more powerful, trust. The kind you relearn piece by piece after years of going it alone. That night, Jake didn't sleep like a man carrying the weight of the world. He slept like a man who had finally found a place to rest. It started as a drizzle, just enough to pattern the pavement with dark spots. By the time Jake arrived at the auxiliary garage, it was a downpour. The rain clattered against the tin roof like 1,000 tiny drumsticks, each drop another beat in a day that already felt different. He had unlocked the garage at 7:00 a.m., long before anyone else was expected. This wasn't a scheduled shift. He wasn't required to be here. But he needed the space. He needed the work. Something to ground him. Something to clear the emotional fog left in the wake of that night with Isabel. They hadn't kissed. Not quite. But the line between them had been erased. Whatever it was becoming, it was no longer just coincidence. Inside the garage, the prototype GX9 stood silent, waiting. Jake circled the vehicle like a man with reverence. The calibration was done, but Isabel had left him with one final puzzle, a mechanical problem, with the rear drive coupling that hadn't shown up on the diagnostics. She'd raised an eyebrow and said, "Sounds like a Jake Morris job to me." Now he was chasing that faint rattle, the whisper of friction, in a system too advanced to hiccup without reason. Rain slanted against the wide bay doors. Jake kept the overhead lights off, preferring the gray-blue light leaking through the windows. It was the kind of morning that whispered instead of shouted, and he liked that. It made space for memory. He worked slowly, deliberately, tools in hand, mind quiet. It reminded him of the garage back in Colorado Springs, the one with the busted heater and the radio that only played static. Back then, it had been just him and Sam, his tiny son, wrapped in a coat too big, sitting on a stack of tires with a juice box in hand, watching his dad bring dead things back to life. Jake was elbow deep in the coupling housing when he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't turn. "Claudia, I know I'm not on the schedule, but I promise I'm not tampering. Just running a check." "Guess again." The voice stopped him mid-bolt. He looked up over his shoulder. Isabel stood in the doorway, her coat soaked through her hair clinging to her cheeks. She looked like she'd walked straight through the storm instead of around it. Jake straightened. "You walked here," she shrugged. Felt right. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Everything okay?" She stepped further inside the door, creaking closed behind her. "I was supposed to be in a budget meeting. Halfway through, I realized I didn't want to talk about numbers. I wanted to talk to you." Jake tossed the rag onto the bench. "That right?" She nodded, her eyes locked on his. "Last night? What we said, what we felt, I don't want to shelve it like it didn't happen. I've done that before. Pack things into boxes labeled later or someday, but it doesn't work. Life doesn't wait. Jake studied her, the way her breath caught slightly when she spoke, the flicker of fear behind her resolve. She wasn't just here to talk. She was here to risk something. He stepped closer slowly. I know, he said. I've done the same. Told myself to focus on work, to stay in my lane. But last night changed something. You changed something. They stood in the middle of the garage, surrounded by silence and steel and rain. There was nothing glamorous about the space. Nothing cinematic. Just the smell of metal, the hum of electricity, and the thunderous rhythm of two people finally letting their guards fall. I keep thinking, Isabel said, her voice barely above a whisper, about my brother, about how he would have loved this place, this project. You. Jake reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. He taught you how to build things. You've been doing it ever since, even when you didn't know it. She smiled, tears swimming in her eyes but not falling. I think he would have liked you. Jake's voice was low. You think he'd be okay with me falling in love with his sister? Her breath hitched. Then, without another word, Isabel leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation, no almost. Their lips met in the middle of the rain-heavy silence. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't fireworks. It was warmth, certainty, a kiss between two people who had seen grief up close and still chose to keep living. When they parted, she didn't step back. She stayed close, forehead resting against his. Jake exhaled. That was a long time coming. She smiled. I saved that one for you too. He laughed, pulling her into his arms as thunder rolled softly in the distance. For a few moments there was nothing else. No deadlines, no diagnostics. Just the sound of rain and the quiet thrum of healing. Eventually she spoke again. There's something I want to show you. Jake raised an eyebrow. Now, yes, she said, stepping back. Right now. An hour later, they stood in a dimly lit storage room behind the main office, Isabel holding a dusty keyring and a small plastic ID tag. Jake looked around. I don't think OSHA would approve. She smirked. They'd be fine if they saw what's in here. She led him to a metal locker near the back, its paint chipped, the handle worn. She inserted a key and turned it with a soft click. Inside sat a wooden box. Rough-hewn, no markings, just aged pine and old brass hinges. Isabel opened it carefully. Jake peered in, and his breath caught. Inside, nestled among layers of blueprints and schematics, was a smaller folder labeled Field Deployment Mobile EV Solutions. But what froze him was the drawing clipped to the top. His sketch. The one he'd shown Claudia in the interview weeks ago. But this version, it had been refined, adjusted, colored, annotated in delicate handwriting he didn't recognize at first, but then he saw the signature in the corner. Leo Grant, Isabel's brother. Jake looked at her, speechless. Isabel's eyes shimmered. He started working on this idea before I ever met you. What you showed me. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a continuation. Like you picked up where he left off. Jake stared at the drawing again, tracing the lines like a map he'd always known. In that moment, the rain outside felt like something holy. He wasn't just rebuilding engines anymore. He was continuing a legacy. Jake hadn't seen the world in weeks, not beyond garages, whiteboards, or Isabel's eyes, but that Sunday afternoon, the world came back in the form of a phone call. It was a clear-skied day in Seattle, one of those rare breaks from gray, and he was taking advantage of it by walking along the waterfront near Pike Place with Isabel and Sam. Isabel had offered to take them out for lunch, and somehow it had turned into hours wandering through market stalls, laughing over clam chowder and sourdough bowls, watching Sam chase pigeons as if he could make one laugh. Jake hadn't felt this kind of normal in a long time. Not borrowed normal, not desperate normal, real. And then his phone rang. The screen lit up with his sister's name. Jake stepped away from the noise, answering with a habitual edge in his voice. Hey, Jules. Everything okay, Jake? Julia's voice cracked before she recovered. He's fine. Sam is fine. I didn't know who else to call. Jake's chest tightened. What happened? I found a letter. From Claire. The name landed like a punch. Claire. His wife. Sam's mother. Gone 3 years now, but not gone in the ways that matter. Grief didn't follow expiration dates. It lived in drawers and smells and songs and now apparently in letters. Jake's throat went dry. We're in one of the boxes from her studio. It was addressed to you. I didn't open it, but I figured you'd want to know. He couldn't speak for a moment. He could hear Isabel's voice in the background, gently guiding Sam toward a nearby bench, giving Jake privacy without having to ask. Yeah, he said finally. Thanks. Can you send it? I already did. Overnight. It should be at your place tomorrow morning. Jake ended the call and stood still for a long time, the phone heavy in his hand. The sun was warm on his shoulders, but inside a shadow had shifted, not a bad one. Just unexpected. Just deep. Isabel came over, her expression immediately reading him. What is it? He hesitated. A letter. From Claire. Her eyebrows lifted gently. A letter. Now my sister found it in a box. From years ago, I guess. She said Claire wrote it for me. Isabel stepped closer. You okay, Jake? Exhaled. I don't know. I haven't thought about Claire like this in a while. I mean, she's always there, but this, it feels like something left unfinished, suddenly asking to be finished. They sat together in quiet as Sam fed pieces of bread to the gulls, oblivious to the shift in air between the grown-ups. After a while, Jake said, You know Claire was the one who convinced me to open the garage. She said, You fix things, Jake, but you don't just fix what's broken. You make things better than they were. Isabel smiled softly. Sounds like she knew you well. She did, he said. And then she was gone, and it felt like the engine just stopped turning, like the whole thing locked up and I couldn't even find the manual. Isabel touched his hand. You didn't stop. You just kept going, even without the manual. Jake turned to look at her, the late afternoon sun catching in her hair. What about you? Did Leo ever leave you something like that? Isabel looked away for a moment, blinking against the light. He left pieces, scribbles, schematics, half-thoughts written in the margins of things. But nothing I ever found wrapped in an envelope with my name on it. Sometimes I think his whole life was the letter, and I'm still reading it. That stayed with Jake. The idea that people don't always leave you with a full sentence. Sometimes just punctuation, a pause, an ellipsis. When they parted ways that evening, Isabel pressed a small envelope into Jake's hand. What's this? He asked. A distraction, she said with a half smile. Just in case that other letter hurts more than it heals. Jake looked at her with something between wonder and fear. Why are you always a step ahead of me? Because I've had to chase meaning through silence for years, she replied. You learn to listen between the beats. The next morning, the letter arrived before sunrise. Jake sat at the tiny kitchen table in his rented apartment, coffee growing cold beside him, staring at the envelope like it might disappear if he blinked too long. His name was written on the front in Claire's handwriting. There was no date, no return address. Just his name in blue ink, slightly smudged. He opened it slowly. Inside were 2 pages, handwritten. No punctuation in places, no careful edits. Just thoughts raw and tangled and unguarded. Jake, I know this isn't the kind of thing people do, writing letters for after they're gone. But I know you. I know how you carry things, heavy things, quietly. And I wanted to take something off your back. You did everything you could. You made me laugh when I couldn't stand. You held my hand like it could keep me here. It almost did. But Jake, you can't keep living in the broken pieces. You fix things. That's what you do. But this, you can't fix this. And that's not failure. That's love. Find someone. Not to replace me, but to remind you that love still happens. Even after. And tell Sam. Tell him I hope he still loves the stars. Love you always, Claire. Jake read the letter 3 times before the tears came. Not loud, not messy, just steady. Like rain on a roof. Like something gentle finally giving way. Later that day, he met Isabel back at the garage. She was standing beside the GX9 arms crossed, reading a new schematic. When she looked up, she saw something different in his eyes. What did it say? She asked quietly. Jake handed her the letter. I want you to read it. Isabel unfolded it slowly, reading with the care of someone who understood what it meant to hold someone else's goodbye in her hands. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes glassy. She was brave. Jake nodded. She was. A long silence stretched between them. Then he said, I don't know where this goes, you and me, but I want to find out. Isabel smiled. I think you already are. As they stood side by side, the prototype humming faintly behind them, Jake felt something settle in his chest. He hadn't just survived grief. He was building something new from it. And this time he wasn't building alone. Jake had seen engines fall apart in dozens of ways, belts snapping mid-turn valves, seizing tiny pieces slipping out of sync, and throwing the whole system into chaos. He had always known what to do: isolate the failure, clean it up, and build again. But people didn't come with schematics. And now, for the first time since arriving in Seattle, Jake felt truly unprepared. It started with a data glitch, just a corrupted reading on the prototype's remote interface system. Minor fixable. He'd flagged it, documented it, and submitted a report. But then another bug popped up. Then another. Readouts came back inconsistent. Battery performance dipped without warning. By Friday, the GX9 wouldn't start at all. Isabel and the rest of the senior team swarmed the issue. The problem wasn't Jake's fault, everyone knew that. But in the high-stakes world of R&D, failure didn't wear a name tag. It was just there, floating in the air like smoke, waiting to stain whoever stood too close. Jake worked late, poring over specs, running simulations, trying to chase a ghost he couldn't see. By Sunday, the whispers started. He overheard one in the hallway. Maybe he's not ready for this level. Then another in the break room. Prototype was solid until he got involved. Jake didn't say anything. He didn't push back. He just kept his head down and worked. But it wore on him because despite his best efforts, doubt crept in like rust. One morning he arrived before sunrise, finding the garage already lit. Isabel was inside, seated cross-legged on the concrete floor, back against a toolbox tablet balanced on her knee. She looked up, bleary-eyed but alert. You shouldn't be here yet, Jake said softly. I could say the same to you. He hesitated before sitting beside her shoulder to shoulder, the silence comfortable. Familiar. I think I'm losing it, he confessed. This system, it's beating me. I can't find the flaw. I've checked every connection, every software string. Nothing makes sense. Isabel closed her tablet and looked at him. You're not the flaw, Jake. I know, he said, not convincing even himself, but it still feels like I brought the curse with me. First, the garage in Colorado went under. Then Sam got sick, and now this. I keep trying to fix things, but maybe some things stay broken. Isabel was quiet for a moment, then said, When my brother died, I blame myself. He was driving to pick me up from a meeting I shouldn't have scheduled. I told myself I was responsible for the timing, the weather, the road, every variable I couldn't control. It ate me alive. Jake turned to her, surprised. I've never heard you say that before. Because it still hurts, she admitted. But pain doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you survived something that tried to shatter you. Jake's voice was a whisper. What if surviving isn't enough? It is, she said. And so is building something from the ruins. She reached out, took his hand, and pressed something into his palm. He looked down. It was a small gear, from a child's toy engine, a familiar one. This was Sam's, she said. He left it in the back seat of my car last weekend. I was going to give it back, but then I thought, maybe you needed the reminder more than he did. Jake held the piece tightly. It was blue plastic, worn around the edges, but still perfectly shaped. Still whole. A flood of emotion hit him: how far they'd come, how much they'd fought, and how close he'd come to walking away again. I don't want to mess this up, he said, voice raw. Not the prototype. Not us. You won't, she whispered. But you do have to fight for it. Not like a mechanic. Like a man who believes this, she gestured, between them is worth the risk. Just then Claudia walked in, her expression unreadable. We need to talk, she said, her voice clipped, but not cold. Jake stood, bracing himself. Claudia held up a report. The calibration failure isn't on you. The firmware patch we installed 2 weeks ago had a security bug. Encrypted data wasn't syncing with the battery relay. It's corporate's fault, not yours. Jake stared at her. You're sure I filed the report, she said. But there's more. The board is nervous. They're pulling funding for the pilot launch until we can rebuild trust in the system. That means delays and cuts. Jake felt the blow like a hammer. So what happens now? Claudia glanced at Isabel. Technically, your trial ends this week. I could push for an extension. But given the circumstances, it won't carry much weight unless what Isabel asked, stepping forward. Unless we go rogue, Claudia said, surprising them both. Unless we build an external use case that corporate can't ignore. A field trial. Proof of concept. Something they have to reinvest in. Jake blinked. You're serious, Claudia nodded. I'm tired of watching good ideas die on polished floors. A spark ignited behind Isabel's eyes. We build the mobile cart, the one Jake designed. We test it in the community. Use local EV owners' real-world conditions. We prove it works. Jake's heart raced. That's what I wanted from the start. Claudia folded her arms. Then you have my backing. But you'll need more than plans. You'll need people, buy-in, and guts. Jake looked at Isabel. Her expression said everything. He had all three. That evening, Jake returned home to Sam, who was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing something with thick markers. What you working on, Jake asked. Sam grinned. A new garage. It has wheels, like a bus, but cooler. Jake knelt beside him. You think people would like a garage that could come to them? Yeah, Sam said without hesitation, especially if they don't have anyone to help fix their stuff. Jake ruffled his hair. You always know what to say, kid. Sam grinned. I learned it from Mom. Jake's throat tightened. Yeah, I bet you did. Outside, the rain started again, but this time Jake didn't mind. It felt like rhythm, like renewal, like something broken finally starting to hum again. The morning of the field test began before sunrise. Jake stood in the quiet of the operations bay, watching the first light slant in through the high windows. The prototype his cart was parked in the center of the space like a sentry awaiting orders. The sleek, boxy frame housed battery diagnostics, hybrid system readers, and portable charging units, all mounted on a rolling chassis barely wider than a grocery cart. It was modest, but it was powerful, and it was finally real. Outside, the city was still stretching awake. Traffic was light rain, threatening but holding. The kind of days Seattle reserved for moments that mattered. Behind him, Isabel approached with 2 mugs of coffee. Jake took his, smiling. You didn't sleep, did you? She shook her head with a yawn. What gave me away the fact that you still have engine grease on your cheek? She reached up instinctively, laughing as she wiped it off. Price of brilliance. Jake took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle him. Think they'll show they'll come, Isabel said. We reached out to 3 local families who own hybrids but live too far from certified service centers. One of them, Mrs. Dandridge, hasn't had a working car in 4 months. Jake's grip on the mug tightened. Then let's make today count. By 9 o'clock, the mobile unit was loaded into the flatbed truck and heading toward a community center in Renton, a low-income neighborhood where access to green technology was more dream than reality. Isabel drove. Jake sat beside her, glancing at the dashboard, still half waiting for something to go wrong. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Just don't want to miss the landing after all this flight time. Isabel reached across the gear shift, her hand resting lightly on his. Jake, this started with a sketch you scribbled on the back of a receipt. You've already landed. This is just the second takeoff. He didn't speak for a moment. Then it still feels like I'm sitting in someone else's seat. No, she said quietly. You're sitting exactly where you're meant to be. They pulled into the cracked lot behind the community center, just as the first family arrived, a woman in her 50s stepping out of a beat-up Prius with a skeptical look and 2 grandkids bouncing around the back seat. Jake walked up to her with a warm smile, clipboard in hand. Hi there, I'm Jake. We'll be doing a full hybrid checkup and battery efficiency scan. No charge, no pressure. Just helping neighbors today. The woman arched a brow. You don't look like a corporate rep. Good, Jake said with a grin. I'm not. One by one, the cars came: an aging Honda Insight, a Nissan Leaf with a cracked taillight, even a converted plug-in minivan that sputtered more than it purred. Jake and Isabel worked side by side, scanning, explaining, adjusting. Jake taught one man how to clean a corroded charging port. Isabel gave a teenager a quick lesson on battery health. People smiled. People listened. By noon, the parking lot had transformed. Kids played on the sidewalk while their parents stood around swapping tips and stories. The mobile unit had become more than a machine. It had become a bridge. Jake was kneeling by the Leaf, tightening a connector, when a little girl in a yellow raincoat tapped his shoulder. Are you a car doctor? Jake looked at her smiling. I guess I am. She handed him a drawing crayons on construction paper. It was of a car with wings flying above a rainbow. This is for you, so your car doesn't ever fall. Jake swallowed hard. Thank you. I'll keep it with me. Across the lot, Isabel caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. It wasn't data, it wasn't profit, but it was proof. That evening, back at the garage, Claudia called a staff meeting. The cart sat at the front of the room streaked with mud dented from the day's work, but functioning perfectly. Isabel stood beside it, clipboard in hand, while Jake hung back near the tool bench, hands in his pockets. Claudia cleared her throat. Today we conducted our first real-world test of the mobile EV unit. 4 families serviced, 3 minor repairs, 2 new battery lifespan extensions logged, 1 exhaust system reconnected, all done in under 7 hours. Applause rose from the room, some genuine, some surprised. Claudia continued, "This is innovation. Not because it's shiny, but because it works where it's needed most. That's what we're going to fight for moving forward." She paused, then looked toward Jake. "Mr. Morris, you've proven not only your technical skill, but your heart. You weren't just a good hire, you were the right one." Jake blinked, caught between pride and disbelief. Isabel stepped forward. "And I have one more thing to add." She reached down and pulled out a chair seat 27B from a scrapped airplane fuselage now repurposed as a symbol. The room quieted as she brought it to the center. "This," she said, tapping the armrest, "is the seat where I met Jake. Not in a boardroom, not on a resume, on a plane by chance. I didn't know then what he would become to this company, or to me, but I knew he was someone who saw people, not problems." She turned to Jake. "You said once that no one had saved you a seat in a long time. Well, now this one's permanent." She smiled. "And we're building more." The room erupted in applause. Jake stepped forward slowly. He touched the armrest of the seat, then turned to Isabel. "I thought that seat changed my life because it was a coincidence. Now I know it was an invitation." She met his gaze. "And what are you going to do with it?" Jake looked out at the room, the team, the cart, the prototype, the people who had become his family. "I'm going to keep showing up," he said. "Keep fixing what I can, and maybe even fly a little." That night, as the garage lights dimmed and the city breathed quiet again, Jake sat for a moment in 27B, staring out the big bay windows toward the dark horizon, not waiting for something to change, but knowing something already had. The flight was already boarding when Jake arrived at the gate, the sleeves of his jacket still damp from the light spring rain outside. He carried no toolbox, no binder full of sketches or diagnostic reports, just a small duffel slung over his shoulder and a folded piece of paper in his pocket. A letter he hadn't written, but one he read often. Claire's. He stood for a moment just beyond the queue, watching people shuffle toward the jet bridge, business travelers with sleek carry-ons, parents juggling snacks in car seats, couples leaning into each other with soft, tired smiles. Jake hadn't flown since that morning almost a year ago, seat 27A, and a woman with auburn hair who had turned and said, "I saved that spot for you." So much had changed since then. Sam's treatment had progressed well better than anyone expected. He was back in school, obsessed with drawing cars that had wings and ran on sunbeams. The mobile garage unit was no longer just a prototype. It was now a pilot program serving 3 counties. Jake was the operations lead, training mechanics from underserved areas to carry forward what they'd started. And Isabel was no longer just the woman who had believed in him. She was the woman he came home to, the woman he was flying to meet again today. They had decided over many quiet dinners and shared cups of coffee that love for people like them didn't come loud or sudden. It came steady, through presence, through work, through seeing and being seen, and maybe through saving a seat no one else thought to save. "Mr. Morris," a voice called over the gate desk. "You're in seat 27A, just down the left side." Jake smiled. "Yeah, I know the way." The flight was half full. Jake took his seat and rested his arm against the window, watching raindrops trail down the plexiglass. The hum of the engines was calming now, not nerve-wracking. He glanced toward the aisle instinctively and felt his heart tighten. She was walking toward him, Isabel, elegant as ever in a soft blue blouse and dark jeans, her hair down a single suitcase trailing behind her. She saw him, smiled, slipped into the seat beside him, 27B, like it was always meant to be hers. "You're early," she teased. "I was afraid someone might take your seat." She leaned in slightly. That's impossible. It was saved for me. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. I can't believe it's been a year, she said, glancing out the window. Sometimes it feels like it was yesterday. Sometimes like a whole lifetime ago. Maybe both, Jake murmured. Because the man who sat here before, he was exhausted, grieving, unsure if anything he touched would ever work again. And now, she asked softly. He looked at her, eyes gentle. Now I'm building things again. Not just machines. A life. A future. With you. Isabel reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. Leo's, she explained. I found it a few days ago, tucked into an old box I hadn't opened. You want to see what was on the last page? Jake nodded, and she opened it. There, scribbled in a half-finished sketch of a solar battery array, was a single sentence. Someday someone will finish this. Jake stared at the page, his throat tightening. He meant you. Isabel shook her head. I think maybe he meant you too. They sat in silence for a moment, hands finding each other without instruction, their fingers lacing together like threads in a seam that had waited too long to be stitched. The captain's voice crackled overhead, announcing the short flight and calm weather. But Jake wasn't listening. He was watching Isabel as she turned to him with a look that said, we made it. Not without scars, not without sorrow. But they had made it. I had a thought, she said, squeezing his hand. Maybe we should keep traveling. Not just for work, for us. Pick a new seat, a new gate. Keep saving spots for each other. Jake smiled, eyes shining. As long as I get the window seat. You always get the window, she whispered. As the plane ascended through clouds breaking into gold-drenched sky, Jake glanced down at their joined hands resting on the armrest. One hand worn from years of labor, the other shaped by blueprints and memory. Both steady now. Below them, the world turned unchanged in its chaos, but different somehow. Softer, warmer, more possible. And up here, 30,000 feet above the noise, two people sat side by side. No longer lost, no longer waiting, just choosing again and again to show up, to sit in the seat that had always been theirs, to save space in their hearts, not for the perfect moment, but for the real one, the healing one, the one that finally came. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Share your location in the comments and let us know what part of this story touched your heart the most. If this journey moved you, if it reminded you that love and kindness still find their way through the hardest moments, please consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, stories of hope, of healing, and of the quiet miracles that begin with a single act of grace. Thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of second chances.